if this is the future that we keep saying, we're telling people, well, everything's going to be AI is going to do everything for us. You take a step back, you look at what it takes to build that up. If the majority of the languages and the cultures are not being supported in what we're building, then what are we telling the rest of the, 7 billion people? Sorry, you're not going to be part of this future world?
Buongiorno a tutti, I am Paolo Sironi, your host of The Banker's Bookshelf. The Banker's Bookshelf is a podcast show in which I invite authors and researchers of the most interesting books and research papers about the banking present and its fintech future. And in this episode, I invited Theodora Lau for a conversation inspired by her new book, Banking on Artificial Intelligence, Navigating the Realities of AI in Financial Services. Theodora, welcome to the show.
Thank you, friend, and buongiorno.
Theodora, I believe there's no need to introduce you because you're one of the most famous experts in fintech worldwide, so to say. And but anyway, I know that you've been working in venture capital. I know you've been authoring books, so this is your third and your first as a single author. And you are an amazing keynote speaker that inspires audiences worldwide. Now, I was pleased to read this new book of yours that has just been published, Banking on Artificial Intelligence. But I want you to tell the audience with your own very words what makes this book different from all the others that can be found on the shelves of bookstores and on Amazon.
See, we always say that our work is different, right? Regardless of what we write, we always say ours is different.
But I know yours is very different and valuable. So
thank you. And I hope it will resonate. And by the way, Paolo, you are one of the very, very few people who actually got the first manuscript of it. So thank you for everything. I think it goes back to why we write, right? And you write and you publish. And so I think that's something you could understand. What is the raison d'être? I wanted to write because I had a viewpoint. And at that time, the book was conceptualized about a year ago when I was in London. And I was just taking a step back, looking at everything that was going on. AI hype. Everyone got really, really excited about ChatGPT and thought this is the best thing since sliced bread. People are saying, oh, in the future, we're just going to sit back and relax and UBI and everything will be taken care of. And then you look at the other side of the coin and you see people struggling. You see companies trying to make sense of it. You see, organizations using this as a reason, right or not, to lay off their workers. And so there is a different side of the technology that I wanted to portray. And so that was the main reason why I wanted to write the book, is to talk about AI. First of all, as you know, is not new. It's been around for a while. We've been using it in financial services and healthcare and a lot of other use cases for a long time. It has a potential to do a lot of good, but it also has a potential to increase the challenges that we have in the world if we're not careful.
I like the fact that the reason to read your book is because it comes with a motivation, which is very personal, and knowing you is a valuable motivation. And therefore, it develops a perspective which is balanced. Also, most likely, you validated some of your ideas throughout the years in many conversations worldwide. You mentioned London, you definitely spoke with many bankers. But let's start from saying that there's no bank that says that they do nothing with AI. And more banks are saying that they use generative AI. But there might be some preconditions that you have identified in the book to say, okay, so if you do this way, you're really serious about that, otherwise you're not. So what are these foundations that everybody need to look at to make sure that they can effectively start working with AI?
I think that's a really, really good question. And in one of the reports that you did last year, Paolo, you addressed that too. A lot of people will say we're doing AI. But if you dig down into the details, you'll find that many of them said they have done a pilot, right? Majority of them said they have done a small little pilot. Now, bringing the pilot and scaling it up is very different story. When you start thinking about applying it organization wide, you need to think about what are the use cases that I can actually apply it to. How do I pick where to start? Because you don't want to boil the ocean. But then also there's a question of what is your data strategy? What do you have? If you have a lot of different siloed applications, that's a little bit of a mess. You kind of need to clean that up. And then there's also the question of infrastructure. There's a question of governance. So you have the right governance set up, the right risk management set up in there to make sure that you can safeguard what you're doing. Because then it always goes back to financial services as an industry that people trust. Trust is really important.
Mhm.
When you're banking with an institution, you trust that your money is safe. When you're doing a transaction, you trust that the money is going to go through. So you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're doing, for example, extending credit to a small business, you are doing it in a way that is fair. You're doing it in a way that's transparent. Not just only the regulator is going to run after you, but also is your reputation at risk, right? So when you start digging into it, one of the questions that I start thinking about is who are the ones that are able to come ahead? And where are the cautionary tales that we need to start thinking about? If you look at some of the reports, for example, you have, the likes of the JPMs, that BFA, the Capital One, all of the larger institutions that have access to not just data, but they also have access to resources. They have access to talent. They can, good or bad, have more leeway to experiment, to try different things. Whereas some of the smaller institutions, yes, they are more agile, but they also have less resources to be able to try. So the balance of how that works out, that is a very, very interesting and fascinating story.
That's very true. Sort of size matters, especially in the pre-DeepSeek world, where AI transformation was a matter of scale getting bigger, bigger, bigger. So in essence, more expensive. Now the shift has happened. So it seems like AI can become cheaper, but improve the quality at the same time. I researched last year on how many banks worldwide are really serious about doing generative AI. So I discovered that 14% do not intend to do generative AI. 8% at the same time are very strategic, and 70% are more tactical. And I looked at the details of these. So tactical means that these banks start from a business unit more than another because there's more interest or there's more money on the table. But it's not really a single path to AI. What we saw is really, tactical. And strategic instead means that you look at those preconditions in a way that you enable yourself to prepare for scaling AI enterprise-wide. And one interesting element I think I saw is that there was a bit of everything in terms of types of banks and size. So I guess that another thing that is relevant, and you touch upon it, is culture. So I
Mm-hmm.
guess if you have the right culture and you make sure that that culture can express itself on the right foundations, which are architectural foundations, like what we've been doing with data for the last 5 to 10 years, is a precondition to do AI, then you can effectively start executing on AI in a risk control environment. So you can risk manage change. And that would make difference between the banks that are serious about that and those that are not serious. So you need resources, you may need size. Size is a bit less important, I guess, going forward. Let's see what happens in the market, but definitely you need culture. Now, talking about culture, I understand that your writing of this book was also in part inspired by a conversation I had with an Austrian banker. So when we were thinking about all it takes to succeed in a balanced way in the AI world, you also discovered along the way that there were elements of importance that seems to be nuances, but in reality are essential.
Yeah, that was it was interesting because it was something that I never thought of. So it was from a conversation. Again, this was in London, and I was talking to a good friend of mine, and he was talking about using AI, right? So at that point, many of the institutions are exploring what can we use it for, where can we use it for, And his comments to me strike a chord. He said many of his customers, right, at the credit union, they're from Eastern Europe. So a lot of the tools that are already available in the marketplace, they address mostly English speaking countries, or some other parts of the Western Europe. And so his question becomes, well, then he can't really use everything that's available, and they had to actually create their own tool sets. That particular comment made me got into like actually ended up in a rabbit hole. I love to reference rabbits, but and that was how I found out that there are over 7,150 something living languages being spoken today, is actively being used. But if you look at the large language model, the data sets that's there, most of them support 20 something, 50. The largest one I've is supports almost 100. And so it brings forth the question, if this is the future that we keep saying, we're telling people, well, everything's going to be AI is going to do everything for us. You take a step back, you look at what it takes to build that up. If the majority of the languages and the cultures are not being supported in what we're building, then what are we telling the rest of the, I don't know, 7 billion people? Sorry, you're not going to be part of this future world?
And Theodora, I guess you're born in Hong Kong, and I remember some years ago talking to some bankers there. In Hong Kong, people speak a mix of languages at the same time. So part of English, part of Chinese, part of local. So that also adds to those languages you discovered, the nuances of the real world, where a part of the population has its own way of expressing itself, and requires a proper interface to be comfortable as much as the others.
Absolutely. And spoken languages as well, right? There are cultures that their language is just spoken, is not written. And even when you think about documented language, so I'll take Chinese, for example, depends on the context. Sometimes we go from top to bottom, sometimes we go from right to left, and sometimes we go from left to right. So, how are you going to teach a machine what you're supposed to read? Right. And we had the same challenges with Japanese, for example. There are three different ways of writing the scripts.
Mhm.
Again, depends on the context. So, when you start moving away from an English based or French based or Italian based language, you start running into nuances on exactly what are we trying to say and what you can teach the machine. And I think it becomes an interesting challenge, but also becomes a reminder that what we're doing is great and wonderful, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
So why does this matter? It matters because AI is not a technology that sits somewhere in the dungeons or in the server rooms, doing some stuff and then coming up with a result. But it's something that sits more and more next to a person, a worker, on the desktop of an employee, whether that employee is, if you like, an entry level or a senior executive. So we see that the technology is touching all points of the organization. And therefore, it poses a question on how work can be reconceived by plugging AI into everyday's tasks. So what is your perspective about the future of work?
Ooh, I think it's an interesting question because not a day goes by that we don't see some fintech, a bank, tech company that comes out and say, well, guess what? We get better efficiency by using AI because now we need less people doing X. But nobody ever talks about what happens to the people who are no longer doing what they were doing last week. Are we reskilling? Are we upskilling? Are we just saying you're redundant? Sorry, go find somewhere. And I think that trend coincides with how I got started years ago was looking at longevity fintech, right? We're all living longer. Unfortunately, many of us are also working longer. And we live in a culture and society where when you get older, people will be like, well, you are a little bit more detached with technology. You're a little outdated. We don't need you much anymore. So when you have more and more people who are trying to work longer, and then you have organizations that are saying, I need less and less people, now you have a growing group of people who struggle to find work. At the same time, at that intersection, you have people who might not have exposure to technology. They might not know how to use the new tech. And so now you have two big groups of people. And the question becomes, what does this mean? Right? Because we like to say, oh, the tool can make everything go so much more efficient. We have more extra time to spend time with our loved ones and friends. But the reality is, there are a lot of people who don't even get to that stage. And so I think it brings forth a question: what is our responsibility as a society, as a business, as an industry, to bring more people into the fold and to help the rest of the people upskill and reskill? So that was an initiative actually I read about, a big bank in the US, where they intentionally seeked out underrepresented demographics from a city university and say, we are creating apprenticeship program, right? We know that we identify a group of students who might be less fortunate, who might not have access to all these things that we're talking about. We're going to bring them in. We'll give them exposure to what we're doing. We'll make sure that they get the education they need, and then they can get started in this future journey, right? So I think if there are more programs like that, I think that will give people a little bit more hope that they can be part of this future.
Yeah. So far we said some very important things. First of all, we said that there is an issue of scale when it comes to working with AI. However, culture might be one of those elements that can help to compensate scale. But culture alone doesn't break through. It requires a good foundations to operate, and those foundations are technical foundations. So we need to look at how banks have invested in those technical foundations that enable them, the small and the large, to start making the right steps ahead in terms of using artificial intelligence. But then we said it's not just foundations that are equal for all, because there's a problem of representation. So we need to look at the world stage, the countries, the communities, the cultures, and make sure that there is a way of calibrating the data in AI so that it can be effectively used and can represent the needs for a certain community or part of society or the workforce. Which then leads into the question of how the workforce has to be transformed, or what is the opportunity for the workforce to reconceive itself in order to have a future to contribute, because there is a future for everyone in the age of AI. And in that respect, I'd like to remind you that however technology is used in banking, banking is a people business. If you look, for example, at the percentage of the operating expenses of banks worldwide as an aggregate from 2007 until last year, the amount of salaries and benefits as a percentage of the total operating expenses moved from 50 to 54.6%. The amount of expenditure in technology went from 6.6%, so much, much less. So now, however, it is important going forward that we help every employee of a bank to work differently in the age of AI. So the question is not just how much automation can be built inside the system, but how much augmentation can be created or support so that people can be capable of talking to people, talking to clients, working teams in different ways compared to the past, which can unlock new value that was precluded before. So I guess that is the most challenging but interesting part of training and reskilling the workforce, looking not just at the technical element, but also the collaborative elements that help them to interact differently using technology that was not available before.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Theodora, using technology requires, if you like, an approach in terms of how much change you can bring in the organization, how much risk you're willing to bring, because no change is risk-free. I like to say that as much as every banker is a risk management being the core business of a bank, now every banker must be an AI risk manager. So the point is not to eliminate risk, but to be capable of relating with the opportunity. So that is an opportunity and not a problem, which spells the discussion about trust and evolution of risk, which is also central in your book. So can you just spend a couple of words about this being so important?
It is important because it's something that it takes a lot of effort to build up, and then it's easy to lose it, right? And so when we think about the intersection of AI and tech and money, It is a tool that bad actors would love to use because guess what? They go where the money goes, and financial and services industry is a perfect place for them. And so now we see the rise of deepfake. We see scammers, right, using deepfake audio and video to basically not just scam consumers, but also corporations. And now the question becomes, well, can we actually use AI to fight AI, to fight the bad actors? It is really scary to see how easy it is to use. I mean, I've done quite a few of the deepfake videos. It takes like less than 10 minutes, and there's a digital me who is not me with a digital voice that's not my voice, but it sounds so real. And I think the challenge comes to, I'll use this analogy. A friend of mine said that. He say AI is like a Formula One car, but it's useless without brakes. So voila, we need the guardrails.
We need brains and brakes, okay,
Yep.
at the same
Mhm.
time. Very good. Now, um, to conclude the discussion around the book, and we have only touched upon some of the key elements. There's much more that I've read that I invite everyone to look at. We discussed about the institution. We went deeper in the institution, talking about the individual, so each and every one of us inside a company. But if we can, if move out of that and take, a more distant look, that is the one of entire economies, jurisdictions, so around the planet, we see that AI is a topic for competition, sometimes a topic for confrontation. So, what do you think is going to happen as AI becomes less a research topic and more a reality in terms of transforming how industries operate?
Oh, that's a tough one, Paolo.
That's
Um,
why you have a book to
right?
provide good perspectives on tough questions.
I don't have all the answers. I think I call it journey to the unknown. Ideally, this is the ideal Theo speaking. Ideally, the technology is so powerful that if we are willing to collaborate and work together, we could solve challenges that otherwise we didn't think we would be able to. Right? We are faced with many. Climate crisis is one. A lot of healthcare research is another one. The challenge is, though, I think increasingly this is becoming a political tool. That's different countries, instead of working together, it becomes a race, right? And so you have a fragmented world that, you have the United States, you have Europe, the UK and France, and then you have Middle East, and then you have China. You see all of these countries pouring millions, billions because they wanted to raise ahead. And then you see policies that come forth that wanted to restrict each other because they see it as a survival.
Mhm.
So I think, um, and the backdrop of this, you see the need for resources for data centers. Do you need the need for clean water? You need the need for power, clean power. So I think the question becomes, what does the future hold? The tech has amazing potential to create a better future. But at the end of the day, Paulo, you said something. It's about humans. And when human nature gets in the way, I think one of the questions I'll ask in the book in the end is, are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? When internet came about back in the late 80s, early 90s, we thought, wow, this is something that can bring people from different corners of the world together. We can exchange ideas. We can advance research so much faster in ways that we couldn't do before. We've seen how that story unfolded the last 20 years. So I think it goes back to the importance of human element. It goes back to the importance of being willing to collaborate to create a better world. It remains to be seen how that's going to go.
Theodora, that's why I appreciate you wrote this book, because already the title spells for balance. The title is Banking on brackets Artificial Intelligence. So, banking on artificial intelligence is a banker's bookshelf recommendation for anyone who wants to understand how financial institutions should approach AI driven transformations in a balanced way. So I invite everyone to stay tuned for more conversations with banking and fintech authors and researchers. Don't forget to subscribe to the Banker's Bookshelf. We are part of Provoke Media podcast family, and we stream on your preferred platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, and YouTube. Theodora, thanks for being with us. Arrivederci a tutti, and enjoy the closing jingle.
Thank you, Paolo.